October 2022. I was living by myself in a small house tucked inside a quiet family-style neighborhood. I had moved there back in 2015, which meant I'd seen how Halloween in the area slowly changed over the years. And honestly, it kind of disappeared. Before 2020, Halloween used to be a huge deal around the neighborhood. Every house would put out decorations, porch lights glowing, fake cobwebs hanging from trees. Kids would run up and down the streets in costumes, knocking on doors and filling pillowcases with candy. It was something everyone expected every year. But after 2020, everything just stopped. No decorations, no kids, no trick-or-treaters at all. For the last 2 Halloweens, the neighborhood had felt completely empty, like the holiday had just been erased. So going into 2022, I assumed it would be exactly the same. That morning, I woke up, made a cup of coffee, and decided to sit out on my front porch for a bit. The trees around my yard had all turned those deep orange and red fall colors, and I just wanted to enjoy the cool October air. But the moment I opened my front door, something immediately caught my attention. There were 2 kids standing in my front yard. They were maybe 30 feet away, near the trees that lined the edge of the property. At least, I assumed they were kids. It was hard to tell. Both of them were wearing Halloween masks. They were tall, though taller than most kids, and really thin. My first thought was that they were probably high schoolers, maybe even adults. They were far enough away that I couldn't see any real details. And the second I opened the door, they noticed me. Both of them froze in place for a moment. Then, almost instantly, they turned and quickly walked deeper into the trees and farther away from my house. The way they reacted immediately felt suspicious. It looked exactly like when you catch someone doing something they know they shouldn't be doing. They didn't run, but the way they hurried off made it clear they didn't want to be seen. And sure, it was Halloween, but I'd never seen people wandering around in masks early in the morning before. Still, I brushed it off. I figured it was probably just a couple of teenagers messing around because of the holiday. They left as soon as they noticed me, so I didn't think there was any reason to worry about it. So I went ahead and sat out on the porch anyway, drinking my coffee and enjoying the cool fall weather. The rest of the day passed pretty normally. Nothing unusual happened at all, at least not until around 4 in the afternoon. That was usually the time trick-or-treaters would start showing up, though, like I said, I hadn't seen any in years. For some reason, though, I still kept up the tradition. Every Halloween, I'd buy a small bag of candy and keep it ready just in case a few kids actually came by. I guess part of me just didn't want to let the tradition completely disappear. So I set the candy aside, sat down on the couch in the living room, and flipped through the channels until I found one of those stations running the usual Halloween movies and shows. I'd also kept the curtains open along the front windows so I could easily see if any trick-or-treaters came down the street. But over the next couple of hours, nothing happened. The only thing I saw outside were a few cars occasionally driving past. No kids, no costumes, no groups walking from house to house. Eventually, the sun disappeared, and the whole street sank into darkness. The neighborhood looked completely empty. Even after all those quiet Halloweens, it still felt strange seeing the night go by without the usual energy. No laughter, no doorbells ringing, no kids running around. Just silence. So I stayed in the living room, sitting on the couch and watching whatever Halloween movies were on TV. Then around 8 o'clock, there was a knock at the front door. The sound startled me enough that I actually jumped up from the couch. I hadn't seen anyone walk up to the house through the windows, and honestly, it seemed pretty late for trick-or-treaters anyway, especially considering I hadn't seen any all night. Still, I grabbed the bowl of candy and walked over to the door. When I opened it, a cold shiver immediately ran down my spine. Standing on the porch were the same 2 kids I had seen earlier that morning. They were still wearing those masks, still dressed entirely in black. And up close, it made the whole thing even stranger. I kept thinking of them as kids, but they were definitely taller than what you'd normally expect from trick-or-treaters. Maybe high school age, maybe even older. Another thing I noticed right away was that they didn't have bags. No buckets, no pillowcases, nothing to carry candy in. They were just standing there. The masks completely hid their faces, and I couldn't even see their eyes through the dark openings. It made the whole interaction feel uncomfortable in a way I couldn't really explain. Still trying to be polite, I forced a smile and held out the bowl. "Do you want some candy?" Neither of them said a single word. They just stood there in complete silence. After a couple seconds of waiting, the awkwardness started to creep in. The silence felt heavy, like they were just staring through those masks. So I slowly closed the door. At that point, I was definitely weirded out. But even then, I still figured it was just some dumb Halloween prank. Maybe they were trying to scare me or get some kind of reaction out of me. I waited about a minute, then opened the door again to check outside. They were gone. For some reason that actually reassured me. It made it feel more like they had just been messing around instead of anything serious. So I shrugged it off and went back to the couch. I stayed there watching TV for hours after that. Honestly, I don't think I got up until around 1, maybe even 2 in the morning. Eventually, I shut everything off and headed upstairs to bed. By that point, I hadn't thought about those 2 masked kids in hours. I climbed into bed, and within seconds, I could already feel myself drifting off to sleep. But suddenly, a loud knock echoed through the house. It jolted me completely awake. I immediately got out of bed and opened my bedroom door. Another knock followed. This time, unmistakably coming from the front door downstairs. In the middle of the night, with the house completely silent, the sound carried through every hallway and room. I slowly started walking down the stairs, trying to figure out who could possibly be outside at this hour. At that moment, I was genuinely scared. Even though part of me assumed it was the same 2 people from earlier, this had clearly gone way beyond some stupid Halloween prank. Showing up at my house in the middle of the night, knocking repeatedly, it felt like harassment, maybe even stalking. Slowly, I stepped closer to the door and looked outside. Only one of them was there. He stood right up against the door, wearing the same mask, continuing to knock again and again. But this time, he was alone. And for some reason that made the situation even more unsettling. Because the first thought that crossed my mind was, where was the other one? I stepped back from the door, trying to calm myself down and think clearly about what was happening. Then I heard it. A soft creaking sound behind me. It sounded like a door slowly swinging open somewhere in the hallway. My body turned almost automatically. At the far end of the hallway, I saw a dark figure standing there. The second I looked at him, he suddenly rushed toward me. And in his hand, I saw a knife. Adrenaline instantly took over. I turned and sprinted up the stairs as fast as I could, ran straight into my bedroom, slammed the door shut and locked it. Then, I started dragging anything I could find in front of the door chairs, furniture, whatever I could move. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone and dialed the police. While I was on the phone, trying to explain what was happening, I could hear muffled voices coming from outside my bedroom door. The 2 of them were talking. I couldn't make out what they were saying exactly, but it sounded like they were arguing or trying to decide what to do next. Then after about 30 seconds, I heard footsteps. They moved away from the door, down the stairs, and eventually out of the house. Not long after that, several police officers arrived and searched the place. They looked around the house and the yard, but unfortunately, there wasn't much evidence for them to work with. But one thing we all agreed on was what had happened. The person knocking on the front door had clearly been a distraction. While I was focused on that, the other one had found a way inside and tried to ambush me from behind. The part that still haunts me, though, is not knowing why. Why they chose my house. Why they targeted me. A lot of people have talked to believe it was probably just a pair of disturbed teenagers, maybe young adults, who had some twisted plan for Halloween night. That explanation would make sense. But the truth is, I'll probably never know for sure. And even now, thinking about it still scares the hell out of me. Right behind my neighborhood, there's a fairly large forest filled with winding trails people use for hiking and camping. I'd explored most of them over the years, but honestly, the trips I enjoyed the most were the ones where I didn't run into anyone at all. Because of that, I usually stayed away from the popular campgrounds and instead set up my tent along the quieter backpacking trails. This particular trip happened near the end of autumn. I remember the trees standing completely bare, every branch stripped of its leaves, and the air getting colder with each passing day. Winter was definitely creeping in, but I figured I still had time for 1 or 2 more camping trips before the season was over. So around midday, I headed out for the hike. When I reached the trailhead, the place was completely empty. No cars, no people, nothing. And during the entire 8-mile hike-in, I didn't cross paths with a single person. I figured most hikers had already wrapped up their camping season for the year. The temperature was definitely colder than I expected, but I'd come prepared. I had had heavy jackets with me and a sleeping bag rated for -20 degrees, which was more than enough for a trip like this. After a while, I found a small open clearing that looked perfect for the night. It sat just a little off the main trail, and I was almost certain I had camped there once or twice before. That familiarity made it feel like a safe choice. I set up my tent, arranged a small ring of stones for a fire pit, and soon had a campfire crackling. Sitting close to the flames, I poured myself a hot cup of decaf coffee, letting the warmth slowly return to my hands. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, the temperature started dropping fast. A steady breeze picked up too, sending waves of cold air straight into my face. Honestly, it was starting to feel a lot more uncomfortable than I had hoped. But the cold wasn't the only thing bothering me. Out in the distance, somewhere deeper in the trees, I kept noticing movement. It was far away, blending almost perfectly with the dry branches and bush, so I couldn't make out what it actually was. But every now and then I'd catch something shifting between the trees. Whatever it was seemed to stay just far enough away that I couldn't clearly see it. Only the subtle motion as it moved from one spot to another. And as the sun continued sinking lower and lower, that strange sight started making me uneasy. The thought that someone or something might be watching me slowly crept into my mind. I tried to push the idea away. I didn't want to believe that was even possible. I kept telling myself it was probably just a deer or some other harmless animal wandering through its territory. But about an hour after sunset, when darkness had completely taken over the forest, that uneasy feeling only got worse. The cold wind and the creeping sense of being watched were starting to get to me. I figured maybe fixing at least one of those problems would help. So I climbed into my tent and slipped inside my sleeping bag to warm up. I left the tent opening unzipped and tied the flap up so I could still feel a bit of heat from the campfire. From inside the tent, I lay there watching the flames flicker in the darkness. The warmth definitely helped, but only being able to see the small area directly in front of me wasn't very comforting. Beyond maybe 10 feet past the firelight, everything disappeared into complete blackness. And I should mention, I'd been camping for years. Being alone in the woods at night was something I was used to. But for some reason, this was the first time it had ever made me feel like this. Everyone always says that if you get a strange gut feeling like something isn't right, you should trust it and leave immediately without second-guessing yourself. Back then, I was naive enough to think that kind of instinct would never happen to me. And even worse, when it finally did, I was dumb enough not to listen to it. Instead of packing up and leaving, I stayed right where I was, curled inside my sleeping bag, staring at the flames of the campfire from inside my tent. A couple of hours passed, maybe 2, maybe 3. Nothing really changed except the temperature continuing to drop. The forest was getting colder and colder. Then I heard it. The sound of footsteps, crunching through leaves and small branches somewhere in the woods. The worst part was where the sound was coming from directly behind my tent. The one place I couldn't see at all. I wanted to get up and look, but my body just locked up. Panic started creeping in, and my mind scrambled to come up with any explanation that didn't involve someone actually being there. I kept telling myself it had to be an animal, maybe a deer moving through the brush. But the footsteps kept getting closer, slowly, steadily, until they sounded like they were only 5 or 10 feet behind the back of my tent. And then suddenly, they stopped. The crunching disappeared, leaving nothing but the soft crackle of the campfire and the wind moving through the trees. My heart was hammering in my chest so hard I could feel it in my throat. I'm honestly a little embarrassed to admit it, but I think I stayed completely frozen for almost a full minute. Eventually, the anxiety became unbearable. The thought that someone or something might be standing right behind my tent was too much. So I made a sudden move. I ripped open my sleeping bag, grabbed my flashlight, and jumped out of the tent, immediately shining the beam straight into the woods behind me. Nothing. There was absolutely no one there. Strangely, that only made the situation worse. I hadn't heard any footsteps leaving. No running, no branches snapping, nothing. And for a moment, I genuinely started wondering if I was losing my mind. I stood there spinning in circles, sweeping my flashlight through the trees in every direction. I must have done that for 15 minutes straight, listening to every little sound the forest made, completely unable to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to pack up and run out of the forest right then and there, even if it meant hiking 8 miles through pitch-black woods. The other part of me thought maybe I should just stay put and keep watch until morning. But the cold was starting to bite hard, and the fire was slowly dying down. Eventually, I decided the safest move was to start packing my gear. I still hadn't decided if I'd leave right away or just stay near the campsite, but packing up felt like the smartest step either way. The moment I started taking down my tent, though, something happened. From the darkness directly behind it, I suddenly heard a burst of footsteps. Fast, like someone quickly moving away. For a split second, I thought I saw a figure running off between the trees. But with the campfire flickering and throwing shadows everywhere, I couldn't be completely sure. My heart jumped into my throat. I hurried to pack everything as quickly as I could, stopping every few seconds to shine my flashlight around the campsite and into the woods, making sure nothing else was creeping closer. By that point, I was completely on edge. Every little sound made me jump. After a few minutes of rushing around, I managed to shove all my gear back into my backpack. I swung the bag over my shoulders, and just as I was about to stomp out the campfire, a man suddenly stepped out of the darkness in front of me. He approached quickly, walking straight toward the glow of the fire. The guy was fairly tall and broad, wearing torn jeans, a dirty-looking fleece jacket, and a black beanie pulled down over his head. He looked to be somewhere around 40 years old. His eyes stood out the most heavy, distant, almost emotionless. He glanced at my pack and then at the dark forest around us. "Leaving already? Pretty late to be heading out," he said in a rough, gravelly voice. "Way too cold to be wandering around out there in the dark." I didn't answer him. I just slowly started stepping backward. The man watched me carefully, like he was trying to figure out how to keep me from leaving. But as the distance between us grew, something changed in his expression. It was like he realized the situation was slipping out of his control. His face tightened, and his eyes locked onto me with this deeply unsettling stare. That was enough for me. I turned and bolted straight into the trees. I could barely see anything in front of me. Branches and brush whipped past as I ran blindly through the forest. But behind me I could hear it, the sound of the man running too, his footsteps crashing through the woods. For about 30 seconds, it sounded like he was right behind me. Then suddenly, the noise faded. Either I had managed to get far enough away, or he just gave up chasing me. Still, I didn't stop. I kept running for another 15 minutes straight, just trying to put as much distance between us as possible. Eventually, I had to slow down. And that's when I realized something terrible. I was completely lost. It was pitch black in every direction, and I had no idea where the trail was anymore. Even if I guessed the right direction, there was a good chance I wouldn't even see the trail in the darkness. So I found a tree, sat down at the base of it, and stayed completely still. Hours went by like that. I sat there in the freezing cold, shivering while the forest remained silent and swallowed in darkness. But a few times, I swear I heard something moving far away among the trees. Slow footsteps, like someone wandering around, almost like that man was still out there, searching. I didn't move. I barely even breathed. I just stayed quiet and waited for daylight. When the sun finally started to rise, I was able to get my bearings and slowly make my way back toward the trail. Somehow, I managed to get out of the forest without being harmed. Honestly, I still think that was a miracle, because looking back on it now, I'm convinced that man had some very bad intentions. I think he'd been watching me the entire night, stalking the campsite and waiting for the right moment to approach. Why everything unfolded the way it did, I honestly don't know, but I'm certain of one thing. I got incredibly lucky to walk away from that forest. Last fall, right around Halloween weekend, my sister had plans to travel out of town for a party. Since she was flying, bringing her dog Milo along just wasn't practical. She was only going to be gone for a couple of days though, so I told her I'd take care of him while she was away. My apartment building doesn't allow pets, so instead of bringing Milo to my place, I decided to stay at her house for the weekend. I packed up my work laptop along with a few things I thought I might need, then drove about 30 minutes to her house early that morning. Not long after I arrived, my sister grabbed her bags and headed out for her trip. Luckily, Milo was one of the easiest dogs in the world to look after. I'd watched him plenty of times before. Even though he was a German Shepherd, he was incredibly calm and friendly, and he hardly ever barked. He was getting older too, which meant he mostly just liked to relax wherever I happened to be. So I set up my laptop in one of the spare bedrooms and started working for the day. Milo curled up in his dog bed beside my desk, just barely in the edge of my peripheral vision. For the first few hours, everything was pretty normal. I worked while Milo quietly rested beside me. But after a while, I noticed something a little strange. Every now and then, Milo would suddenly lift his head. At first, I didn't think much of it. Dogs hear things we can't all the time, so I figured he was just reacting to some random noise outside. But this felt different. Whenever Milo lifted his head, he didn't just relax again after a few seconds. His ears would stand straight up, and he'd stare directly toward the doorway like he was listening for something specific. Sometimes he stayed like that for 5, even 10 minutes at a time. Eventually, it happened so often that I got up and decided to walk around the house to check things out. Milo followed right beside me the entire time. He stayed unusually close, alert and focused, almost like he was helping me search for whatever had caught his attention. I never actually found anything out of place, but the whole thing left me with a strange, uneasy feeling. I finished my work sometime around 5 or 6 that evening. Since it was fall, we still had about an hour of daylight before it started getting dark and cold. So I clipped Milo's leash on and took him out for a walk behind the house. My sister had gotten really lucky with that place. Just beyond her backyard was a forest preserve trail that ran through the woods. But during that time of year, most of the trees had already lost their leaves. The branches were bare and gray, giving the whole area a lifeless look. With the sun starting to sink lower in the sky, the trail felt a little eerie. It was also incredibly quiet out there. Just me and Milo walking down the path, the only sound being our footsteps crunching through the dry leaves scattered across the ground. I knew the trail behind the house formed about a 20-minute loop. We had probably made it halfway along the path when Milo suddenly stopped walking. He completely froze. I looked down at him, asking what was wrong while giving the leash a small tug, but he refused to move. Not even an inch. He didn't even look up at me. Instead, his eyes were locked on something farther down the trail. I turned around and stared in the same direction, scanning the path ahead, but I couldn't see anything at all. When I looked back at Milo, I crouched down and gave him a reassuring pat, then gently pulled the leash again, trying to get him moving. But he stayed planted in place, completely focused on something deeper in the woods at the end of the trail. At that point, I decided not to push it. I turned around and started heading back the way we came. The moment I did, Milo immediately followed. The entire walk back to the house felt different. Normally, he'd stop every few steps to sniff something or wander a little off the path, but not this time. His tail stayed low, and he walked right beside me the whole way. Every few seconds, he kept glancing over his shoulder toward the forest behind us. Seeing him act like that honestly made my stomach twist. I wasn't sure if what made me uneasy was Milo's behavior, or whatever it was that had him so on edge. Once we got back inside, I called my sister to check in and asked if she had ever seen Milo act like this before. We talked for a little while, but she had no idea what could have caused it. And the entire time I was on the phone, Milo stayed glued right next to me. It gave me this strange feeling, like he was aware of something I couldn't see. While we were talking, I started slowly walking around the house again, thinking about it. Every now and then, I'd glance out one of the windows just to be sure everything outside looked normal. Nothing seemed out of place, until I went back upstairs. When I reached the spare bedroom and looked out that window, I thought I saw something. It was only for a split second, but I could have sworn I saw a person walking near the house. The figure moved from left to right and disappeared past the edge of the window before I could get a proper look. It reminded me of those moments when you catch something in the corner of your eye. You're convinced you saw something, but the second you focus on it, there's nothing there. So I couldn't really tell if someone had actually been outside, or if my mind was just playing tricks on me because I was already on edge. I decided to stay upstairs in that room for the rest of the evening. I sat at the desk with my laptop, trying to relax a bit. I watched a few videos and kept an eye on Milo while he laid nearby. For the next couple of hours, nothing unusual happened. Milo eventually fell asleep, completely worn out from the day, while I sat there watching YouTube and trying to calm my nerves. Even with everything that had happened earlier, I managed to push it to the back of my mind a little. I didn't totally forget about it, but I figured it probably wasn't anything serious. Eventually, it got late, and I decided it was time to head to bed. Before turning in, I brought Milo downstairs so he could go outside one last time. I opened the back door and switched on the outdoor lights. Milo hesitated for a moment, but then he stepped outside. While he wandered into the yard to do his business, I stood there looking out at the woods surrounding the house. The trees were still and silent, giving the whole place an eerie feeling. I watched Milo walk toward the edge of the yard near the trees. Then suddenly, he stopped and slowly turned around. He wasn't looking at me though. Instead, Milo was staring toward the side of the house. Curious and a little confused, I leaned slightly out of the doorway to see what had caught his attention. And within seconds, I saw him. A man suddenly came rushing straight toward the back door. I instantly jumped backward in shock, and at the same moment, Milo lunged forward, sprinting directly at the guy. For a brief second, the man looked completely terrified. He froze in place and tried to move out of the way as Milo closed the distance between them. For a moment, I honestly thought Milo was about to attack him. But right at the last second, Milo pulled back. Instead of biting, he began barking aggressively and growling, standing his ground while still listening to my voice as I shouted for him to come back inside. He quickly turned and ran back toward me. The second he crossed the doorway, I slammed the door shut and locked it. Before I could even look outside again, the man had disappeared. Just like that. Within a few seconds, everything outside went completely silent again. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone and immediately called 911. But to be honest, the police weren't very helpful. They walked around the property, shining their flashlights into the yard and toward the woods. But that was about all they did. While we were standing there talking about what had happened, I absent-mindedly fiddled with the back door handle. That's when I realized something strange. The lock on the door wasn't actually working. The latch would click like it was locked, but the door could still be opened anyway. When I told my sister about it later, she was completely certain the lock had never been broken before. That night I didn't feel comfortable staying there anymore, so I packed up and took Milo with me to a nearby hotel. We spent the entire next day there. The more I thought about everything that happened, the more unsettling it became. Based on how Milo had been acting all day, I'm pretty sure the guy had been somewhere nearby the entire time. It's possible he had been watching the house, maybe even following us during our walk through the woods earlier. But another thought still bothers me. There's a chance he might have actually been inside the house at some point earlier that day. I keep remembering how Milo kept staring at the doorway over and over again while I was working. And the fact that the back door lock didn't work feels like a pretty strange coincidence. Either way, Milo definitely scared him. He startled the guy enough to make him panic, which gave us the chance to get safely back inside and shut the door. What's strange though is that my sister has never had anything like that happen again since then. No strange sightings, no suspicious people, nothing. Which makes me wonder if the guy wasn't there for her at all. Maybe he had been watching me for a while without me realizing it, and found out that I was staying alone in a quiet house in the woods, instead of my apartment building surrounded by neighbors. Maybe he thought that was the perfect opportunity to try whatever he had planned. And honestly, it probably wouldn't have been anything good. I can't say for sure what his intentions were, but ever since that night, I definitely felt a lot more on edge.